Welcome to the next instalment of the Proformance Strength and Conditioning webinar series. This is episode number 4, where we'll be hearing from performance enhancement specialist Nick Grantham. The episode today is sponsored by Excentric, the creators of the K-Box 3 flywheel training system. You can find out more about the Excentric K-Box at their website, www.excentric.com, or follow them on Twitter at @go_excentric. So this is the 4th webinar in the series as we continue to expand our network of education events, which includes the upcoming LTAD conference in the UK, Child to Champion, which is running in April on the 9th and 10th. Should be a great weekend with some top presenters coming in. So we're really excited to have a coach of Nick's caliber and experience presenting today, discussing the evolution of technology in strength and conditioning that he's seen throughout his career. Having seen Nick present previously, I know it's going to be a great presentation for you. I'm sure there'll be lots of stuff to take away. So one of the big reasons that we've opted for the webinars over podcasts at present is because it gives you, the viewer, the opportunity to interact with presenters like Nick. So if you have questions as we're going along, please use the live chat box, and Nick's going to pick up the questions at the end and answer them at the end of the presentation. And if you can hang in there to the end, we've also got an exclusive offer for you from Nick, which we'll be sharing with you at the end of the show. So Nick, welcome to the show, and thanks for giving up your time this evening.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having us. I'll tell you what, that was very professional.
We're trying. So Nick, for those people watching that maybe aren't so familiar with you, could you give us a bit of a background to your education and experience in strength and conditioning?
Sure. So I've been working in high performance sport for getting on for almost 20 years now. So when I graduated from university, I went for a sports science degree route and an exercise and nutrition science route because strength and conditioning in the UK didn't actually exist as a profession. There were no jobs. You were a sports scientist, a physiologist. So that's what I originally graduated as. I was very fortunate to start my first role with British Gymnastics, but very quickly realised that being a physiologist and being a sports scientist and testing people wasn't really what excited me. What excited me was what went on between the test dates. How did you make an athlete better? And I became aware that strength and conditioning was this new field that was coming to the fore in the UK, and that's when I decided to become a strength and conditioning coach and work in the realm of physical preparation. So I was very fortunate. From working with British Gymnastics, I went across to England Netball and then the English Institute of Sport, where I was one of the first strength coaches to work for that institute. That really afforded me a great opportunity to work across a wide range of sports, and I think to date I've probably worked with about 35 plus sports, from individual sports, team sports, Olympic, professional, Paralympic. And I've also had opportunities to work in performing arts and with the military. So I'm very lucky, I think, that I've got a breadth of experience. I like to classify myself as a specialist generalist. I'm quite proud of that. Sometimes it's viewed as a bit of a substandard thing to say, but actually I'm quite proud of that because it allows me to look at any situation with a fresh set of eyes and bring some experience to it. So I've been around a little bit, I guess, is in short.
Yeah. Well, and I guess, 20 years in 35 different sports. But from talking to you yesterday, it doesn't sound like you're prepared to stop. So it sounds like you've got, well, I know since we ran the workshop last year, you've obviously been super busy. I think I've seen you release 2 books, and now you're launching the Professional Fitness Coaching Academy as well. So obviously, you've told us a bit about what you've been up to. Can you tell us a bit about what you've got coming up in the near future?
I do seem to put myself under a bit of pressure and always keep busy. Like you say, the 2 books, You're Hired, which has been out for a while, which is that sort of guide to becoming an S&C coach, and that's purely a charity book. So that was sort of a labour of love. And then the sort of the grown-up book, I guess, by a proper publisher, something that's not self-published, was the Strength and Conditioning Bible, which launched in November and seems to be doing well. I'm getting some nice reviews and good comments from people, and I've been pleasantly surprised. It was kind of aimed at the end user, in terms of the sort of recreational standard athlete, but actually a lot of coaches are picking it up and finding that there's some useful tips in there for them as well. So that's been great. And then, as you mentioned, the Professional Fitness Coaching Academy is something I've been working on for the last couple of years. And we did a sort of a soft launch of it in November. We've taken stock of how that worked and we've refined it, and we've going again with a sort of a revised version, kicking off in April, May this year, and we've got a new website that'll be up and running. So that's really sort of bridging the gap for personal trainers and fitness coaches that want to, increasingly they're finding they're working with people that are taking a more athletic approach to training, recreational athletes, age group athletes, and probably the current standard of training for personal trainers doesn't necessarily cover that type of program design. So that's something that we're trying to bridge the gap and produce a modular program that sort of guides the participants through the education pathway. So I'm really excited to kick that off again properly, and we've got, like you say, we've got some interesting offer for your guys that remain with us through to the end of this presentation.
Super. Right, well, I shall step back here and I will let you get on with presenting Computer Says No.
Okay, brilliant. So let's kick off. When James asked me to give a presentation, and he was interested in looking at sort of how technology has influenced what we do as strength and conditioning coaches, I came up with this idea of Computer Says No. If you're not from Great Britain, you might not be aware, but there was a sketch show that one of the sketches basically had someone sat at a computer, they'd put in a load of information and would just say Computer Says No, and that was it. Just end of the day. It doesn't sound very funny, but it was quite funny when you watch it on TV. The whole premise behind that is that some people and will rely heavily on what the technology tells them, and they make their coaching decisions based purely on that. And that's something I've seen over the years working. I've seen where technology has been really useful and enhanced coaching, and I've also seen where people have used it and over relied on it and taken sort of the numbers that are produced as black and white and the truth, and to their detriment. So what I wanted to look at was, I see increasingly strength and conditioning professionals, sports scientists that are really, really knowledgeable, but possibly over rely on technology to give them the answers. And the question that I sort of pose, and that we may or may not get an answer to by the end of tonight, is have we actually forgotten how to coach? If you're a strength and conditioning coach, there's a clue in the title. You've got to be able to coach. And absolutely, technology is something that you should embrace and use, but it's not necessarily the be all and end all. So what I want to do tonight is take you through how I've seen the application of technology develop, and give you some case studies, and just talk you through how I've used it and when it's worked and when it's not worked quite so well. And hopefully there'll be some useful take-home messages for you. It's not really a technical session. I'm not going to get too in-depth in terms of the technical X's and O's of how we use velocity-based training or how we've used GPS. It's more about the practical application of it. But if you want to know more details, then by all means fire some questions and I can direct you some people that are far more knowledgeable in those areas than myself. So let's crack on. Again, if you're from overseas, this may not be a phrase that you're familiar with. It's certainly a phrase that gets used in the UK, and you would say to someone, well, you're all fur coat and no knickers. And what that basically means is that superficially, on the outside, you look $1 million. You look like you're doing all the right things. You've got a fur coat, but underneath you've got no knickers. So what we're saying is, superficially, you've got this positive appearance, but actually it belies the reality of what's actually going on. And I think increasingly what we've seen is, with the influx of technology, you see a lot of teams and coaches that are wearing a fur coat but have got no knickers. They're using a lot of technology because it looks good, but actually it's not being used to inform the coaching process and give any real performance benefits back. And I think that's something we need to be really careful of. That certainly we need to use technology, but not at the expense of performance. So I want you to sort of keep that in mind as we go through, and I'm sure you can think of situations and teams that are doing lots of what would appear on the outside to be really sophisticated measures, collecting lots of big data, which is something we'll look at. But actually, is it impacted on performance? Is it actually making a difference? Or is it just fur coat and no knickers? So where I think technology is useful is understanding performance. Sport has been an area that's probably been very subjective in the past. It was an opinions based, well, I think in my day this is how we did something. I've got a gut feeling. And what we need to do is add some objectivity to it. And if we think about strength and conditioning, there's a heavy bias in terms of biomechanics, looking at Newtonian laws. So there's a lot of objectivity that we can bring to help us actually understand our performance. And that's what we want to do. We want to try and understand what is the unique fingerprint of our athletes, so that if we understand what they're doing, if we can then unpick how they do it with the application of technology, and then with our coaching knowledge, try and explain why it's going on, then I think we've got a really good chance of objectively understanding what creates performance. And if we understand what creates performance, then we can influence it with our training programs. And that's the key thing for me. So we want to use technology wherever possible to give us some objectivity that we can then match up with our coaching experience, with our sort of gut instincts that we see from spending years on the floor delivering, and impact positively on performance. So what are the sorts of things that we can look at? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking at these, because I think this is the sort of stuff that we should all be aware of. But we can think of where technology can help us. So kinematically, what does movement look like? There's various things that we can look at. Now, when I first started, if we wanted to, we had to develop a coaching eye, because the video stuff was really, really difficult. And this is where I think technology has helped us massively. If I wanted to video a movement, I would have to get a big VCR recorder. It was just an onerous task. So you either had to watch live and develop a really good coaching eye and see in a split second the movement, or you had to go through quite a rigorous videoing session, which wasn't very easy, and it wasn't great at giving instantaneous augmented feedback. Technology has helped us massively. It's very easy now to, with our iPhones or with our tablets, just capture the kinematics, so we can quickly start to dissect, when we're watching athletes, what movement looks like. And that's one element that we need to understand. So what is the movement? Building on from that, we then need to look at, well, what are the kinetics? So we know what the movement looks like in terms of performance. We know how we want our athletes to perform. How do they actually generate that movement? What's the center of mass doing? How are we producing force? What flight times have we got? How are we applying force to the ground, and what ground reaction forces are we getting? And again, in the early days when I first started, yeah, you could get that sort of information, but you were going to have to go to a sports science lab, usually in a university, and you were going to have to use kit that was costing tens of thousands of pounds. We can now, with the advance of technology, have, again, apps that we can open up and that can give us jump heights, that can give us sprint times. We've got wearable devices, wearable technology. So again, technology has helped us look at the kinematics. So now we can look at what the movement looks like. And it's also helped us with gathering information from the kinetics side of it. We can actually start to put some numbers on with kit that doesn't cost 10, 20, 30,000 pounds and requires a lab tech to work it. We can just get it out of our pocket, and it's on an app, or it's a wearable device that we slip onto our arm. And we'll talk a little bit about that towards the end, about my use of velocity-based training and linear transducers. to give us some augmented feedback with some of the teams I'm working with currently. So there's two elements. And then the next element is the energetics. What are the bioenergetics? What's the sort of energy systems that we're using? And again, how do we train that? Are we looking at heart rate zones? Are we looking at blood lactates? Technology, again, has advanced massively from the early days of watches that were sort of, you'd probably need to do a weight session to be able to lift them on your arm, to, again, wearable technology that's in your phone that you can wear on your wrist, that helps us get ideas of the sort of the metabolic type of work that we're carrying out when we're training. So again, the advances of technology helped us with kinematics, what it looks like, kinetics, how we produce that movement, and the bioenergetics, what's actually driving the systems. The other area that we can look at is wellness, and this is probably the sort of the holy grail at the moment, which a lot of teams are looking at in terms of preparedness, the readiness to train and compete. In the early days, it was paper and pen. Then we went to Excel spreadsheets, and now you can get dashboards, apps, various predictive analytics who will suggest to you that they can predict when people are going to be ill, when people are going to be in optimum condition. I'm not hugely convinced that that's the case, but nonetheless, we've now got technology that helps us not only collect that information, but interpret it and disseminate it to our athletes in a timely fashion. And again, when I give you some of the examples of my work using this in the early days, I'll talk to you about some of the pitfalls and some of the mistakes that I made that I've learned from moving forward. And then finally, linked to the wellness data, again, there are companies out there that will create predictive models, and based on historical data, will be able to tell you the types of injuries that you're going to pick up and potentially predict the types of injuries. Again, I'm not overly convinced that that's as easy as it sounds, but certainly we can collect and be a lot cuter in our use of technology to collect data on position-related injuries, how we manage load through technology such as GPS and accelerometers, how we get players back from injury with some objective data. And again, I'll share my experiences working with basketball and how we use GPS to manage load and improve the return from injury with athletes that I work with. So those are some of the key areas. And again, this is another sort of analogy, which is very similar to the fur coat and no knickers. So just in case you weren't getting that one, I thought I'd put this one on in it. And certainly, I think I've highlighted there's a lot of technology that we can use. There's certainly a lot of information that we need to collect. And trust me, if you look at any professional sports team, they are collecting a lot of information in probably all of those areas that I spoke about. They will have databases that are huge, that are trawling big data. But the question that I'll raise again is, is it like having a sports car on the driveway? So, people will drive past your house and think, well, that club's doing really well. Look at that. They're doing all this thing. They're collecting, they've got a predictive model for injuries. They're collecting load management data from matches. They're doing all the stuff. They look amazing. But then when you go inside, they've got no food in the fridge. So they're all starving. So again, same thing, superficially, it may look really good, but does that actually belie the reality of what's going on? I'm not suggesting that's happening at every club or every athlete you work with, but I think it's there's certainly clubs that have probably gone through those stages and are coming out the other end now, and are at this point starting to understand how to use technology better to actually impact on performance. So there's currently a conference taking place in Doha, and it's looking at load management and data collection. And I've just been sort of dipping in and out of that on social media. And Martin Boucher, who is a sports scientist that I really got a lot of time for, I think sums it up really nicely in this slide. It's how we use data that's more important than the data on its own. And I think when we see a new piece of technology or we have the ability to collect numbers, sometimes we forget that's all we're doing. We're collecting numbers. We've got a human being at the end of that. So the numbers are pretty much useless if we don't understand the athlete, the human, how to interpret that data, how to use those numbers to impact on performance. And I think, often, particularly with new graduates that have come through a very academic process where they've looked at and got all the book smarts and they know how to collect system mass volume loads and create pivot tables and collect huge amounts of data, they're great at doing that. But then it's the interpretation of that data and using that thing that's sometimes not very scientific, called your gut instinct, to actually say, well, you know what? Computer says no, but my experience and what I'm seeing says yes. So it's how we use the data. That is more important than the data on its own. So what I want to do now is I want to share with you sort of 4 to 5 examples of through my career where I think I've done things well and lessons that I've learned. So hopefully you can take some take-home messages away from this and not fall into the traps that I did. So the first role I had was working with British Gymnastics, and I was very fortunate to work with them for a period of 4 years, initially full-time, and then moving to a consultancy role in the build-up to the Commonwealth Games in 2002. And in the first year, we set about a pretty monumental task of medically screening and fitness profiling every member of the British Gymnastics that was on a national squad, right from all the age groups, from junior ranks all the way through to seniors. And we are talking hundreds of athletes. So we set up a 2-day profiling. We chucked loads of staff at this. We had gymnasts on rotation going through medical screening, performance profiling, fitness profiling, you name it, we monitored it, we collected the numbers. And before this era of big data and Moneyball, we had collected some serious information on these people. And that was it. That is what we did in the first year. We collected a load of information and did very little with it, and on reflection, that we did those gymnasts a massive disservice, because they came in, they gave up their weekend, we had loads of staff there, we collected lots of numbers, but we didn't really do anything meaningful with it in a timely manner. We got some reports out, we collected some information that, in hindsight was useful, but did it make those gymnasts better the following year? No, I really doubt it. So, bad on me for doing that and being part of that. However, we ran it a second year, and we were all conscious that we didn't want to fall into that same trap again. So second time round, we ran it again, 2 days. Every single gymnast on a performance plan came in. But this time, we made sure that we had the capacity to, within a 48-hour period, give every single gymnast that came a report on their fitness profile. So that was far better than what we'd done before. So they could walk away, and within 48 hours, they had a report. They knew where they were for themselves, where they ranked within their squads, and it was the real first sort of benchmarking that we'd ever done. And I think that was really good. So look, big data is great. Collect the numbers, but make sure you do something with it. That's my key thing that I learned when I was working with gymnasts. Because otherwise, as Martin Boucher said, you're just collecting numbers for the sake of it. You're not actually doing anything meaningful with it. So moving on from there, I went to work with the England netball team. And at the time, I didn't really realise how innovative we were being. And from two ends. The first one was with heart rate analysis. So when I started with England netball, heart rate monitors were just about knocking around. But they were big old watches, not great functionality, and pretty difficult to use. And then Polar brought out the team system. And this team system allowed us, I think it was up to 10 to 12 units that could be worn. And the beauty was we didn't have to wear them with a watch. And that was a huge innovation for us because it allowed us to do a number of things. We used it in terms of fitness profiling, but we could monitor training without having to wear watches, which was useful, in terms of contact issues. And most importantly, match analysis. And I'm not sure whether countries that we played know that we did this. They certainly didn't at the time. They might not have known it now. So I'll talk about each of those and some of the pitfalls that we saw. So with the fitness profiling, what it allowed us to do was when we ran aerobic fitness tests, when I first started with the players, they weren't particularly well conditioned and didn't necessarily know how to push themselves to maximal exertion. So what the heart rate monitors did was it allowed us to make sure that we got true max values. Now, initially they were wearing watches before we got the Teamer system on them. One of the problems was again, the computer says no. The girls would know what their predicted max heart rates were, and they'd be checking their watches. And once they hit their predicted max, they would stop. And clearly, some of those predicted maxes were way off. So one of the solutions for that was, much to their disdain, was the second time we did the profiling, I went round with physio tape and taped up the faces of the watches so they couldn't see and pull out early. We wanted a max that was going to be a max. So that was one of the pitfalls. That was one of the things we learned to get around. We could then monitor training. So we could look at, making sure that getting the players to wear this during their training, which might not sound particularly innovative now, but trust me, that was like a watershed moment for them. So it was a way that working with a national squad spread throughout the country and some overseas, I could very quickly see, one, were they adhering to their program, and were they hitting the sorts of training zones that we needed them to be in to get a performance gain. And then the final one, the most innovative application, was actually in game. Wherein these, we were the only country that did this. I'd come into the sport and it didn't have a particularly good tradition of physical preparation, and their endurance training was very typical slow, steady state, long, slow distance type efforts, which if you've ever watched international basketball, you'll know it's almost like the polar opposite. International netball is high intensity efforts. There was an aerobic base, but it's punctuated with very high repeated sprint efforts. And I remember when we downloaded the data from our first international game that we wore that, fed it back to the players, and we're like, listen, you have now got to train the way you play, because what you've been doing up until now is almost like the exact opposite. So that was great. It informed our practice. It was pretty non-invasive. They just wore the belt. We were a little bit sneaky. Other teams didn't know about it, and I think that really gave us the edge over a 2 to 3 year period when working with them. So that was the use of heart rate monitors, and now the technology is there and it's integrated into other units that you can use, and can prove very, very beneficial. The other side was wellness, and that was collecting some of that data that we looked at in terms of injury profiling, health status that I looked at the start of the talk. The first thing was adherence, so to check that they're actually sticking to a training program, and then also looking at lifestyle management. So creating in the early days an Excel spreadsheet that players could complete and fill out and send to me via email that I could then open up and look at on a Monday morning, and I could check to see, one, are you doing the sessions, and two, am I getting any red flags that causing me issues and concern in terms of the way that you're conducting your training or your lifestyle. So again, in the early days, it was wellness questionnaires, which then led on to Excel spreadsheets, and now there are a range of platforms that can be used and apps that have been developed to track athlete wellness and adherence, and very affordable and very easy to use in this day and age. Then moving on to more recent years in terms of working with the Great Britain women's basketball team, and that was my first introduction to the application of GPS monitoring. And GPS was something that had been around for a while in professional football and rugby, but it hadn't really been used in terms of indoor sports. And obviously, prior to the development of an indoor system by Catapult, we were really just using the accelerometry information, but it provided us with massive performance gains. The first year that we used it almost exclusively with our injured players, and probably one player in particular, to provide us with some objective data in terms of their return to play. And it allowed us, this was probably our standout player. We needed this player to perform in match situations, but they had chronic knee injury that would curtail their ability to play in the games that we needed them to show up in. So, using the GPS, prior to that, you'd have used the good old thing of your coaching eye and your gut instinct to assess whether the player was accelerating as hard to their right or left, or accelerating over completing the right amount of accelerations with the right sorts of G-forces being produced. What this information gave us was the ability to have an inside look and actually see, they have completed 20 accelerations, 15 decelerations. They're not cutting as hard to their right compared to their left. And it allowed us to reintegrate this player far quicker into the program with a lot more confidence that they could take to the court and play 4 minutes per quarter. Because what we also had was we had match data, we had game data, so we knew that in a typical game we would expect X amount of accelerations, X amount of player load. So we were much more confident of returning this player to the squad to take to the court when we needed them to. Now, the data was really useful. One thing, again, linking back to our computer says no. When we reintegrated this player back into practice, I remember the data analyst was looking at the numbers, and he came up to me concerned at the end of her first practice saying, look, I think this player, I think we put her back in too soon. She's not accelerating and decelerating anywhere near the level that she's hitting when she's been with you in the rehab settings. So I think, she's holding it back because of the injury. She's probably not let on. And I said, did you actually watch the session? Because if you actually watched the session, this was a player whose basketball IQ was probably the best on the team, whose game management and awareness of where they needed to be was far better than other players. So actually, when you watch her, no, her accelerations and decelerations probably weren't anywhere near that of the other players or what we were seeing in a training situation, because guess what? She knew where she needed to be. She could kind of coast in, not hit the brakes as hard, not accelerate as hard, and she would just be a far more efficient and effective player. So that was a great sort of example of where the computer says, this is the numbers, but you've got to coach what's in front of you. You've got to look and understand your athletes and say, well, yeah, I know the numbers are saying that, but actually that's only part of the story. That's only giving me part of the truth. It's not giving me the whole truth. And that's something that's really important. The following year, we then integrated this into the whole squad, and we actually managed to create offense and defense drills. We had all those drills categorized in terms of player load, the amount of red zone minutes they were using, how many accelerations, decelerations, how many medium intensity jumps, high intensity jumps. And that allowed us to categorize the intensity or the internal versus external loading and the mechanical loading. And, that threw up some interesting conversations with our coaches. We had a drill, the rainbow drill, so called because it was supposedly, one of the easiest drills. But actually what we saw was, whilst that may be a low level drill for other countries and other teams, for our players, for the makeup of our players in terms of their physical qualities, that was a really high loading drill. And it was no surprise that if you look at the screen, you can see some pretty big red spikes in our training loads. That was when we started doing some of these drills that were real high loaders. So that meant we could go to the coaches and try and explain, look, I know you may do this in America or Australia or Europe, and it may work for your players. But the players that we have, with their level of training history, their level of conditioning, what you perceive to be a low loading drill is actually our highest loading. and it's our highest loading from a mechanical standpoint. And most of the injuries that we have are load compromised injuries. They are from mechanical loading. So, you know, we can either take that drill out or we can adjust it, or you can keep on going with it and you won't have a starting 5. So, you know, GPS is a wash in all sports, and it is providing some really good information. But again, it's got to come back to what Martin Boucher was saying. It's not any use just as data on its own. You've got to have data plus the skill to understand the athlete and the coaches that you're working with to interpret it. And then finally, what I'd like to do is share with you some work I've been doing over the last 3 seasons within professional football in the EPL. And we'll touch briefly on velocity-based training, the use of some technologies like GymAware and wearable technology like the push system. And just show you, again, what has potential to be a real case of fur coat and no knickers actually is probably the opposite way around. We are trying to do some very simple things as well as we can, and I'll talk you through this. So when I first started working at the club, it was quite startling. You know, we tracked back and looked at attendance, and 83% of the players completed less than 1 supervised strength program session a week. So, you know, we can have all this sophisticated interventions, but basically, if you haven't got bums on seats, you've got no chance of having a performance impact. So, you know, we had the majority of the squad not taking part in any supervised, structured strength and power development. So rather than get all clever, we went for 3 areas. Number 1, attend. Get bums on seats. It didn't really, and it's for another talk, another time to go through these on their own. But we needed to get bums on seats. We needed them to adhere, to stick to a plan, and then we knew if they adhered to a plan and stuck to it, we would get training adaptations that would optimize their potential. So this is what we looked at. So when we first started, we had one GymAware system, and we monitored watts per kilogram. We've since changed that. We're not looking at watts per kilo because it's a number derived from other numbers. And again, this is something you have to realize with technology. Most of these technical pieces of kit are based on algorithms and, you know, associations and relationships. So, you know, unless you're getting the one number that it produces, you're not getting the whole truth. Okay, we're getting versions of. But when we initially used it, we looked at watts per kilo, and what we saw quite clearly, if you look at the chart, is that players that trained once a week were getting an 11.6% improvement. Players that trained more than once a week, so that's the green bars, were getting 11.6% improvement in their power outputs in terms of watts per kilo. And we know that stronger players make more powerful players. More powerful players are faster. Okay, we know about that phase potentiation. So we were clearly seeing that if you had at least 1, probably 2 hits a week, you were going to get sort of significant performance benefits. And look, do you know what? If we only got you in once a week, we were still going to see quite a nice improvement, 5%. And then what we did see was that those that came in less than once a week, well, guess what? You know, if you understand your underpinning laws of training, you know that there's going to be a detraining effect. And that's what we were seeing. And guess what? We were seeing detraining in the players that weren't attending our supervised sessions right at the time when we need them in the EPL over that congested winter fixtures period. So, you know, what the use of GymAware gave us was some objective information that we could go back to the coaching staff and the support staff and say, look, we're not asking for a lot, but we can see that, look, we're not talking cause and effect, but if they train more, there's an association that we're going to create. We're going to optimize their athletic potential. We're going to make them more powerful. And okay, that might not make us win on Saturday, but surely it's giving you a better raw product to go out and work with. And all we want is 2 short, sharp sessions a week to bring that about. So the use of technology was really good for us using the GymAware system to get that objective data. We then moved And this is just highlighting one of the players who in the first season was completed 5 supervised sessions. Okay, this is a professional athlete. But then in the session when we introduced the Gym Aware and some augmented feedback, 47 sessions. And we got a significant improvement in terms of his power output in watts per kilo. So, all that sort of stuff allows you to go and make objective arguments to support staff and coaching staff. This season, we've introduced the push band and the push system, which is a wearable technology, and we're looking at velocity-based training now. What we found is that the players have really bought into the Gym Aware and the push bands because they get a number. They're competitive animals, and we just did training today, and we had the players in, and you've got people staying back wanting to do extra jumps, and what it allows us to do is get some intent into the training so that we know that on the limited amount of time we have, because they've got numbers, because they've got targets, because they're getting feedback immediately from this technology, we are getting better quality in terms of our training sessions. And moving forward, we've just started working with the push system. Moving forward, what we will now do is, because we've had the attendance, because we've got players adhering to a program, we'll now start to dial in and use sort of velocity-based training and set parameters on, if it's a strength session, what bar speed are we looking for? If it's more power orientated, then we want to see the bar speed hitting other figures. So again, as coaches, it allows us to tailor our sessions. And yeah, with our coaching eye, we're usually pretty good at seeing if that bar's moving as quickly as we want to. But again, it's always nice to have some objective data to back it up, so long as we use it to change performance. And then finally, just quickly, I'll go through, because I'm conscious of time, my use of technology in golf, working with a professional golfer. And this is sort of the output that we get from going from looking at wellness in terms of their adherence and lifestyle. So this is just a simple data collection that we've used this season to track a variety of wellness parameters and also training data. So we can look at the splits and the loads that he's completing. And what it allowed us to do was find pinch points within his season when it started to unravel and didn't go quite so well. And we can link that back to simple things like travel, sleep hygiene, motivation, training quality. And then we can link those into some of the training data that you'll see on the more colourful graph where, okay, once your strength training or your movement quality training drops below a certain amount per month, that's when you start to detrain and get problems. So what it's allowed us this year is to say, right, we recognise those pinch points. What we're going to do now is adjust the way that you play this year. So you're not going to do more than 2 tournaments on the bounce, because we know that you can't cope with that in terms of health and wellness. And you've got to be robust to get round 20 plus tournaments in a year. So that's how I've used technology, simple data displays and dashboards. And again, all of this is available on tablets and phones, and wherever he is in the world, the player can crunch his numbers in, and I can sit on a Monday morning and quickly look at it and look at any red flags and get back in touch with him. The other side is that at periodic times during the year, we've used the Optima Life system, which uses the Bodyguard and looking at heart rate variability to look at stress reactions. And this is really trying to give an inside look at his readiness to train and compete and actually understand what are the demands of being a pro. So this is pretty non-invasive kit that you can wear anywhere from sort of 72 hours up to sort of a week, and it gives a great insight into what is actually going on with this player. What effects travel has, what effects lack of sleep has, and what it allows us to do is open up conversations and start showing objectively, look, you don't cope well when you travel economy class and you are traveling for 6 hours or more. Okay, so we can then put in an intervention that's going to allow them to travel better. So we look at the nutrition and the way that they travel, for instance. So again, using pretty sophisticated monitoring data tools that were previously out of reach to someone like myself, just working as a consultant. These would cost tens of thousands of pounds previously, but now there's entry packages where you can pick these units up relatively inexpensively, and you can complete these data collection and reports and feedback interventions for less than £300, which in terms of a performance gain, it is a small amount of money to pay, and it can have a big impact across an athlete's performance. So again, how we've used technology, a variety of technology, to enhance performance. So that kind of brings me to the end of the examples and the case studies based on how I've used technology in real life situations. Some of the pros where I've got it right, some of the cons where I've made mistakes, but hopefully lots of lessons that I've learned, and hopefully reinforce them all the way that, by all means collect data, use the data. But as Elizabeth O'Brien from IBM said a number of years ago, data is data until you put it into context and unlock it for people. So, I think we have to be better. If we collect data, we have got to make sure that we find a way of getting that across to our athletes and our coaches in a way that they understand it, so that, again, it can impact on performance, because otherwise it's useless. So I want to finish off with this, one of the last slides, which I love, which comes from Dave Hancock. Dave Hancock is a performance specialist. He's worked in the EPL, he's worked in the NBA, and I saw this a number of years ago, and I think it's really worth bearing in mind. So we've got two sides of the coin. We've either got objectivity or we've got subjectivity, and the scientists, the boffins, will tell us that we've got to go objective on everything. We've got to collect numbers. It's got to be factual. We've got to have direct observations. If you can't count it, it's not worth it. Okay. And then on the other side, you've probably got where I was a few years ago. The coach that's kind of, well, it's okay. It's an opinion. It's judgment. In my day, this is how we did it. I believe. I think. And it's not an either or. It's not that one's good and one's bad. It's just that, there's a whole load of stuff in the middle that's called expertise. And that's where a lot of the good stuff takes place, okay? And I guess, as I set it up at the start with the fur coat and no knickers, as I set it up halfway through with the Ferrari on the driveway but nothing in the fridge, it's no use collecting lots of data, using lots of technology, if you don't then match it up with your skill as a coach to interpret that data and then disseminate that information across to your athletes and coaches in a manner that will bring about a change in performance. So the take-home messages from this: understand the limitations of technology. So technology is really useful, but you've got to be able to interpret it accordingly. Data, okay, it's not black and white, and I would encourage you to look at Mel Siff's work in Super Training. He talks about fuzzy logic. Okay, it's not an either or. It's not a black and white. Just because the computer says no doesn't mean necessarily it is no. That is where, as coaches, we have to be able to interpret that data and contextualize it and put our own thoughts onto it. Don't just rely on a black box telling you not to do something. Be aware that when you're using technology, what are the algorithms that are being used? There's some interesting, again, at this conference in Doha, they're looking at sampling rates on GPS units, and are the sampling rates high enough to actually give us the information that some of the manufacturers are purporting to give us? Okay, maybe they can't pick up subtle changes in directions, accelerations, decelerations. So we're hanging our hat on these numbers that we're seeing, but are we getting the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So just because it's a sophisticated piece of kit, just be aware of the limitations that it may or may not have. Any use of technology, it's about a practical application. That's the most important consideration, the number one thing to think about. So one, is it simple to use? Okay, it's got to be time efficient, it's got to be portable, non-invasive, Portable, so important that I said it twice. Obviously, there's a little typo, and the athlete's got to want to wear it. Okay, if you give them something that's bulky and clunky that's not going to work and impede their performance, it's a non-starter. It's got to be cost effective. Okay, no matter what team you work for, whether you've got millions of pounds to spend, you've still got to get bang for your buck. So it's got to be financially viable. It's got to be cost effective in terms of the finances, the time to use it, and the personnel. Okay, if it requires an army of experts to use it, again, chances are it's not going to be particularly effective. And then finally, the way that you display that data is really important, because it's no use sat on a mainframe desktop computer on an Excel spreadsheet. You've got to get it out there in a timely manner. You've got to be able to export that data and produce reports that are visually easy to interpret. So those are my take-home messages. So remember, the biggest take-home message is sometimes it's better to walk around just in your knickers. Okay, try and avoid the trap of being the person that wants to wear the fur coat, that has to have all the technology. By all means, use the technology, but keep it simple. And if it means just walking around in your knickers, that's what you got to do. I'd like to just take this opportunity to thank you for listening, and we'll dip back in now with James, and I'll do my best to answer any questions that you've got. So thank you very much.
Okay, Nick, thanks very much. Nick, if we keep your slides up there so people can see your contact info.
Yeah.
So, guys, the live chat window's on your right hand side. I see Jay has potentially started to ask a question, but it's kind of got cut off. That hasn't come through, Jay. So if you could maybe type that again, that'd be great. But maybe I can fire a question to begin with, Nick.
Sure.
I know from bits and pieces that of technology that I've bought over the years, it's quite easy for that technology to sort of get left in the cupboard or, in the training bag. How do you make sure, in terms of your setup, say with your VBT stuff, your train with push, how do you make sure the guys are on board and using it every session?
So with most of the ways that I work is I try and do it by stealth. So I'm not a kind of a my way or the highway kind of guy when I work. So I think I was talking to you a little bit before. We work with the train with push guys, and we've got enough units to work with the whole squad. But we quickly decided, actually, if we do that, it's going to be tough to roll out, and we're going to have some players that are going to be skeptical. So what we did is we found players, individuals that we thought would be up for using this type of technology, that were kind of probably a little bit more of our cognitive players, that like the numbers, that like the instantaneous feedback. So it's about knowing your athletes. And we then trialed it in a very sort of low-key manner, because again, if you work in professional sport, the last thing you want to do is slap a load of kit onto players, it not to work, and then you've got everyone just going shambles. You don't know what you're doing, and you've lost the squad. So we almost sort of like beta test it, I guess. We pick the players that we know are good citizens, that are probably going to be up for using this kit, and we trial it, and we probably don't lay any promises as to what it is or isn't going to do or provide us with. We explain we're trying this as much as you are, so we're gaining as much information from it as you will be. And then once we're happy with that, then we filter it out to the rest of the squad. Once we're comfortable with the data we're collecting, the numbers that we're using, how we're feeding it back, then and only then would we consider rolling it out to the rest of the squad. Because what you've got to imagine, within that squad of 20 plus players, not everybody's going to be on board with wearing this stuff. So you've got to have very good rationales and reasons for doing it. Otherwise, you'll just get picked off. And that's the same with things like GPS units. You've got to make sure that it works, that the kit that you're putting into them is not invasive, that it's comfortable, that it gives you numbers that you can interpret. So, yeah, I guess I always go in sort of under the radar with any application of technology, and I'll have used it myself as well. So as I said to you before, I tried a number of wearable technologies, some that worked, some that didn't work, before settling with the guys at Push and using that one.
Sure, that's great. There's a question come up from Jay, so I'll just read that one out too. So it says, Nick, would you make any training interventions for a player whose training intensity and volume is consistently low, even if they are top performers in an academy setting?
All right, okay, so hold on. So if they're a top performer out on the pitch, but their training volumes and intensities in the gym are low, that's your sort of age-old question. Yeah, I mean, I'd probably want to be looking at that. I'd want to be looking at why that's the case, particularly with a younger player. You know, it's easy to get away on technical and tactical talent alone, and as a junior. And I think I've talked about this in my youth workshops. You know, I don't care if you're a 13-year-old superstar, because it's about performing well when you're a senior. So certainly the sorts of conversations I would be having if I was seeing a work ethic that wasn't, you know, hitting the sorts of metrics and numbers that I was expecting in that age group, I'd certainly be having conversations about, look, you know, this is the work we need to do off the pitch, or even on the pitch if they're not working as hard out there. You know, the work that we're trying to do is to set you up for a career longevity. And whilst at this age you are certainly a talented youngster and you're performing really well, you know, when you become a senior athlete, you're out there with seasoned pros, and you need to look at your physical preparation as not holding you back, I guess. Hopefully that answers Jay's question. I'm sure he can always come back to us if not.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on that one. So obviously you work with some fairly high profile clubs. I'm sure they're not on completely unlimited budget, but they've got a fair amount of money to spend. If you're a coach here listening now, and you're on a limited budget, what would be the one piece of technology maybe you'd be committing to make sure that you had?
Well, I'll tell you what, I've never seen it work with sports that have loads of money. I'm always on a limited budget.
On the playing budget, that's why.
Yeah, the one piece of technology, well, it's a bit of a cop-out answer, is your coaching eye. I develop your coaching eye, you know, and that is you, the coach. It's the best bit of technology you can have. Actually watching, immersing yourself in the sport, understanding what the movements are, and then I guess to back that up in this day and age, you know, invest in an iPad or other tablets are available, or some sort of smartphone where you can get analysis tools and apps that will look at sprint times, that will look at flight and jump times, coach's eye, stuff like that, where you can actually slow the videos down and look at how the movement occurs. So I guess if that was the one piece of technology, develop your coaching eye, have something like your phone with some apps, and then, do you know what? I'll actually go one further. I would say some of the wearable technologies now that give you that feedback in terms of velocity-based stuff, that's been a real eye-opener for me, and seeing how the players have adapted to that. And, you know, when they wear that stuff, their sessions, the quality of the session just improves.
Cool. And when you program with that, with Push, obviously they've got the Push portal. They've just released version 2.0. Do you program centrally from the portal, and then they access that on either a tablet at the club or on their own phones to get the feedback? Or
yeah, we've tried both. So we're only rolling it out in with quite small numbers with individual players at the moment, but we program it for those centrally, and we've got the iPod attached to our squat stand, and the player is assigned to that station, and they go away and they work through it. I mean, we operate the systems ourselves at the moment for them, but again, with time and familiarity, they'll be able to do it themselves. But yeah, we program it centrally, and it's great because it just captures all of our information, and we can export it and manipulate it how we want.
So would you, as they progress, would you consider using the push technology in sort of the off season, send them off with a band program and then track what they do in the portal?
Yeah, definitely. Depends on what sports you're working with as to how diligent they are in their off season. Certainly with the golfer that I work with, we use that. We use the heart rate variability with the Optima Life system, because once we get into the season, he's playing a tournament every other week, so I don't see him very much. So the beauty of having some wearable technology that gives me some numbers to look at back here in the UK whilst he's chasing the sun around the world, at least I can have a look and see, okay, well, you said you've done a strength session, but actually you weren't moving at the velocities that we need you to be. You need to load the bar heavier, or you need to load it lighter, so it allows me to be that sort of virtual coach, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is something we didn't really have last year, and he was training, but I don't think he was always training with the quality and the intent that he needed to. So I think this will give us a, big brother, really.
Yeah.
Sort of look at him. That'd be good. Sounds
great. Right, guys. So if there are any further questions that you want to fire through, please use the live chat. We'll have an eye on that for another couple of minutes before we finish the broadcast. Now, we did say at the beginning as well that it would be an exclusive offer for guys attending the webinar. So, Nick, do you want to talk about the offer that you've got in place for these guys, or?
Yeah. So as we spoke about at the start, we are relaunching the Professional Fitness Coaching Academy. So the new website should be up this week coming. It's a modular program designed to develop the fitness professional to sort of bridge the gap between their existing knowledge and where they need to go to sort of stand out from the crowd. I'm really quite proud of the expert panel that we've pulled together. We've got some of the UK's foremost experts from the world of strength and conditioning, personal training and fitness, nutrition, media and PR. So it's a great program. It's a program that I think will stand up, and I'm very proud to sort of put together. So with the relaunch of the new program, the various levels that we have, what we can do if anyone wants to sign up to the program, if they email thepfca.com. So it's info@thepfca.com. I'm sure you can put some details of that for us, James.
Yeah.
And just quote PFCA 2016. You'll get a 10% discount on any of the programs that you sign up for.
Excellent. That's great, Nick. Thanks for offering that. Well, what I'll do is I'll follow up with a mail out for people that have attended, so that they can catch those details and make sure that nothing's missed. For those of you that are following the series of webinars as well, you'll know that we've got another one in just over a week's time on Sunday the 6th of March. We've got Brett Bartholomew coming on to talk about building buy-in. So there'll be a link in the post-webinar email for you to sign up to that one as well if you've enjoyed this one with Nick. I must take the opportunity to say, Nick, thank you very much for taking the time out on your Thursday evening to share this information with us. I certainly find it really insightful and made me really reflect on the way that we're using or even maybe not using data at the moment and how we can improve those practices. So it's a great chat. So thanks very much.
No problem. My pleasure. Absolute pleasure, James.
Okay. Cheers, guys. We shall catch you soon.